Hello there, dear friends, and welcome once again to the Relaxed Fantasy Review. On this channel, we spend our time looking at fantasy of all sorts, from books to movies to video games, and applying the characters within into the tabletop game Dungeons & Dragons 5th Edition. Today, we're looking at an iconic character from one of the greatest fantasy films ever made, The Lord of the Rings, and the dwarven warrior that stands beside the Fellowship, Gimli. Gimli is a beloved character, is the iconic dwarf that comes from the franchise, and although he starts out as a bit of a bull-headed guy, he softens and becomes great friends with his elven companion and his human that turns into a king by the end. But how would Gimli play in a game of Dungeons & Dragons? Well, I've done a little bit of analysis. Let's see what I came up with. Now, Gimli is decent-natured dwarf. He's about 80 years old. He is about 4 feet tall. He's about an average height for a dwarf. Stocky, though. Weighs 200 pounds with that 4-foot frame. Tan skin, brown hair, and brown eyes. But what kind of character is he? He's a mountain dwarf, as evidenced by his bloodline. His alignment is lawful good. Dwarves often line up with lawful alignments. They have very, very strict codes and societies they stand by, and although Gimli is a little crass sometimes, he is still a good character by no stretch of the imagination. His background is noble, because he does come from noble families of the dwarven kingdoms, and his class is barbarian. That's a pretty easy thing to determine. He's a frontliner, he takes a lot of hits, and is constantly swinging his axe around, and I actually made him a berserker barbarian. I feel like that makes a lot of sense for a character like Gimli. He's just in there exhausting himself every time he fights, and that's kind of how he rolls. As far as his stats go, as a dwarf, he's incredibly strong. I gave him a strength of 18. Not particularly fast or agile. I mean, he's no slouch when it comes to moving around on the battlefield, but his dexterity ain't winning him any contests. I gave him a 12 in that. But he is incredibly tough, taking hits from large enemies and getting knocked around and always getting back up. I gave him an 18 in Constitution, too. His intelligence and his wisdom, nothing to write home about. He's not dumb, he just doesn't really use his head a lot. So I gave him a 12 in intelligence and in wisdom. And although he can be a little rough around the edges, he does know how to be charming in the right moments. I gave him a 14 for his charisma. I also made him level 12. Based on the powers that barbarians get throughout their career, it seemed like a good spot to land him, not giving him the super high powers, but not denying him some of the more key aspects of the barbarian class. He speaks Common and Dwarvish. I also gave him the Orcish language, since he seems to understand them, at least to some degree. As a barbarian, he can wear light and medium armor and carry a shield, although we don't really see him doing this, and is proficient in every weapon you can imagine. He also is proficient in brewer's tools, because why the heck not? He wears breastplate armor, not full plate, as we can see. He's not super comfortable in super heavy armor, but he definitely wears medium. And he carries a bunch of axes. Hand axes for throwing, a battle axe for general fighting, and a great axe for when he has to swing around against big targets. His armor means that he's not going to be getting his unarmored defense power, so his AC just sits at 15. But his speed is increased up to 35, 10 feet faster than the average dwarf. And he has a hit point max of 137, a decent pool. His dwarven background gives him dark vision and dwarven resilience, as well as stone cunning for those history checks to do with the ancient dwarven ruins. He gets proficiency in strength and constitution saving throws, and is also proficient in athletics, history, investigation, and persuasion. Again, it makes sense coming from a dwarf with that noble background. And then finally, his barbarian traits. He can rage, like any barbarian could, and his rage can also send him into a frenzy. That's when he does extra damage, but exhausts himself. And again, that makes sense for Gimli. He can use the reckless attack power, giving himself easy advantage, but also leaving himself kind of hanging for other people to hit him pretty hard too. He's got his danger sense, he's got his extra attack, and he does have the mindless rage power. The feral instincts and the brutal critical power, these are things that power up the barbarian when it comes to hitting hard, and when they hit hard, they just destroy their enemies. The intimidating presence can also make barbarians tough on the battlefield, and the relentless rage power makes it so that rage just never stops, and Gimli doesn't stop unless he is ready to stop fighting. I then gave him a couple different feats for his level. Dwarven Fortitude, which enhances his health and strength and defense even further. The Durable feats, that's a really, really key one there. And then the Fighting Initiate feat. Barbarians, funnily enough, don't get fighting styles, which I thought is a little bit of a weird one. But I think Gimli deserves it. He's a trained warrior, and since he grabs that great axe and swings it around the battlefield quite easily, I decided he would have the Fighting Initiate feats for great weapon fighting. Just lets him do more damage with his axe, and it makes a lot of sense for Gimli. All in all, while Berserker Barbarians can be a bit of a one-track-minded person, for Gimli it makes sense. He's the kind of character that will just rush in headfirst without really thinking, and just beat people up and kill his enemies without hesitation, even if it exhausts him. It makes a lot of sense. This is the kind of barbarian that you want on your side when you're fighting against enemies that are deadly, and I think that Gimli is the kind of dwarf that you would want to have with you in moments like that. This has been the Relaxed Fantasy Review. If you enjoyed the video, please like and subscribe down below, and keep your eyes peeled for more character creations coming down the line soon. Have a good one, my friends.